Okay, so today we're going to tell you some really fascinating stories. These are the kinds of tales passed down, those old prohibitions our elders might have warned us about.
Exactly. They're not just quirky sayings, though. They often come from these deep wells of ancient belief, collections of wisdom.
Right. And what we want to do is explore some of the really well-known don'ts. We'll look at the spooky reasons people gave. But also try to see if there's maybe a hidden practical logic underneath it all. Like, why were they really saying these things?
It's about trying to understand the underlying need or observation that started these rules.
Yeah, looking at old folklore with slightly different eyes, maybe. Let's just dive in. First up, one that sounds, straight out of a horror film. Don't let a black cat cross a corpse.
Ooh, yeah. The traditional belief there is pretty chilling. The fear was basically if a black cat jumped over the deceased person's body, their spirit couldn't find peace, it would get stuck, couldn't move on, couldn't be reborn. It would turn into this restless ghost haunting people.
And specifically black cats. Why them?
Well, yeah, they were often seen as, having ties to the spirit world, sometimes linked to sorcerers, or even thought to be vehicles for spirits.
Okay, so a black cat doing that was extra bad news.
Definitely potent. Terrifying, really, in that belief system.
So that's the supernatural angle. But if we try to strip that away, what practical thing could this rule be about?
Well, think about a traditional funeral back then. They often placed food offerings near the body, right? Or the coffin.
Okay, yeah, offering.
And where there's food...
Animals show up. Cats especially.
Exactly. A cat, drawn by the smell, could easily jump up onto the body or onto the coffin, or even just over it.
And even if you didn't believe in angry ghosts, that would seem...
really disrespectful.
Yeah.
During a very solemn, serious time.
So the rule wasn't just maybe about preventing a haunting, but keeping things respectful, maintaining decorum.
Precisely. The scary ghost story was a powerful way to make sure people kept cats, or maybe any animals, away from that sacred space. It layered that deep cultural fear onto a pretty simple, practical need.
Makes you wonder how many rules like that started with something practical, like respect, or even basic hygiene.
They used the beliefs people already had to kind of enforce the behavior they wanted, and yeah, respect was huge.
Okay, sticking with funerals for a moment. Here's another one. People with open wounds shouldn't attend funerals.
Yeah, the traditional belief for this one was quite graphic. It was said that if you went to a funeral with an open wound, that wound just wouldn't heal properly. It would fester, rot, basically. Take forever to close up, maybe never.
Wow, that sounds awful.
Some sources even mention carrying thorny plants, as a protective measure if you absolutely had to go.
Thorny plants. Okay, that's a detail. So the fear was this horrible non-healing injury.
Absolutely. And back then, a wound that wouldn't heal wasn't just painful. It could stop you from working, from farming. It was a real threat to your livelihood, your survival.
Okay, yeah, that sounds scary enough. What's the practical logic we might see here?
This seems like a really clever, though maybe indirect, bit of public health advice. This was way before people understood germs, right?
Right, no germ theory.
Funerals were gatherings.
Often crowded.
And the conditions... well, not exactly sterile.
We'd have dust, dirt, maybe it was outside.
Exactly. And think about the environment around a body, especially without modern preservation methods, maybe in warm weather. You could have insects, flies, bacteria, just generally unhygienic conditions. An open wound is like an open door for infection.
And without antibiotics or clean bandages,
a small cut could easily become deadly. So the warning that your wound would fester and rot was probably a very vivid way of saying, look, stay home, it's dangerous for you here.
It kept people who were already vulnerable away from a place with a high risk of, bad germs.
It's a fantastic example of practical health advice wrapped up in a scary, superstitious warning to make sure people listened.
It's like they knew there was a danger. They saw the correlation, even if they didn't know why scientifically.
They observed the outcome. People with wounds at funerals got worse and made a rule using the strongest language they had. Spiritual consequences.
Okay, one more funeral one. Don't let your tears fall on the corpse or the coffin.
This one's very emotional in its traditional belief. The idea was that your tears, representing sorrow and attachment, would somehow bind the spirit of the person who died, keep them tied to this world, stop them from moving on to the afterlife peacefully.
Wow, so your grief could actually trap their soul. That's heavy.
It really adds a weight to mourning, doesn't it? So what's the practical angle here?
Yeah, what could that be about?
Well, think about it. For your tears to actually land on the body or the coffin,
You'd have to be really close, leaning right over.
extremely close, yeah. And like we were just saying, infectious diseases were a huge cause of death back then. Being that close to someone who died, especially if maybe they died from something contagious, well, that seriously increased your own risk of getting sick.
So like the open wound rule, this was maybe about keeping a safe distance.
Exactly. You can't really tell people not to cry at a funeral. That's impossible. Cruel, even.
No, of course not.
But you can tell them that getting so close that tears fall has a terrible spiritual consequence for the person they love.
That emotional leverage, fearing you'd harm their soul's journey.
Was a really powerful way to encourage people to just, keep a little bit of physical distance for safety without saying, stay back, you might catch something.
Using the deepest concern, the soul's well-being, to enforce a health precaution. That's kind of brilliant, in a way.
Using the spiritual to manage the physical, protecting the living.
Okay, let's shift gears. Away from funerals. How about this one? Don't cut your own hair in front of a mirror.
Right. This one has a wonderfully weird traditional reason. The belief was if you did that, you might attract a ghost.
Okay.
And the ghosts might lick your hair.
Lick my hair. Why would a ghost do that?
Apparently, maybe it was a tidy ghost. The idea was it might see your, uneven self-cut job and try to lick it straight. Or tidy it up.
Okay. Even if it's trying to help, a ghost licking you is unsettling.
Definitely unsettling. So that's the spooky part. What's the practical thought behind it?
Yeah, what's going on there?
Well, think about hair cutting tools back then. Not like today's nice sharp scissors or electric clippers. We're talking maybe sharp knives or big clunky shears.
Trying to cut the hair on the back of your own head with a knife. That sounds tricky.
Tricky and potentially dangerous. Cutting your own hair, especially with bad tools and zero training, was super difficult. You'd almost certainly end up with weird patches.
Yeah, a bad haircut guaranteed.
And worse, you could easily cut yourself. Nick an ear, slice a finger. Barbers, though, they were skilled. It was a craft.
So the ghost story might have been a way to stop people from trying something difficult and risky, something best left to the pros.
That seems very likely. It mixes that fear of something strange and unwanted, the ghost licking, with the very real risk of hurting yourself or just looking ridiculous.
And maybe reinforces the idea that haircutting is a skill worth paying for.
Could be. Discourages DIY attempts that often went wrong. A mix of self-preservation and maybe value in craftsmanship wrapped in a weird ghost story.
Okay, sticking with hair. Another timing one. Don't cut your hair on Wednesday.
Yes. The belief here is pretty straightforward. Cutting hair on Wednesday brings bad luck, like lifelong bad luck or some major misfortune.
Lifelong? Wow.
Yeah, it's a strong superstition. And you see it reflected historically. Lots of barbershops actually used to close on Wednesdays.
Okay, so why Wednesday specifically? Is there a practical or historical reason?
This one has a really interesting historical root tied to social structure. Back in the days of absolute monarchy, the king had his routines, and grooming was important. Apparently, the king would often summon the best barbers to the palace on Wednesdays for his haircut, maybe trim his nails, that sort of thing.
So the royal haircut day was Wednesday.
Seems so. Which meant, on Wednesdays, the most skilled barbers weren't available for regular folks. They were busy at the palace.
Okay, so it was inconvenient.
Initially, yeah. But over time, getting your haircut on Wednesday became associated with, trying to act like the king, trying to be on his level.
The source mentioned, trying to be equal to the master.
Exactly. It was seen as disrespectful, maybe presumptuous, so something that started with inconvenience and social hierarchy.
Turned into a belief that the day itself was unlucky for haircuts for everyone else.
Precisely. The original reason busy barbers respecting the king's schedule got lost, and it just became this ingrained superstition about bad luck.
Fascinating how history and social rules can morph into supernatural beliefs like that.
Yeah, the context fades, but the rule sticks, just with a different justification.
Okay, next, don't. Don't walk under a clothesline, especially if you're wearing an amulet.
Right. The traditional belief is that if you walk under a clothesline, particularly one with things like underwear or sarongs hanging on it, it will weaken or drain the power from your religious amulet or maybe a sacred tattoo or charm you have. The word used is kudnithin, meaning it diminishes, loses its sacredness.
So your protection just stops working.
That was the fear, yeah. The practical side of this seems rooted in ideas about purity, respect, and symbolic hierarchy.
Hierarchy, how so?
Well, amulets, sacred objects, monks, blessings, these are considered high things. Pure, spiritually elevated.
Okay.
Clotheslines, especially with undergarments on them, those are considered low, mundane, maybe even ritually unclean, depending on the item.
Right, representing the everyday, maybe bodily functions.
Exactly. So passing a high sacred object underneath low, mundane, possibly impure items was seen as deeply disrespectful. Symbolically, it lowered the status of the amulet, and therefore its power was thought to diminish.
So it's less about magic draining away like a battery and more about maintaining symbolic respect, like keeping high things high and low things low.
That seems to be the core idea. It reinforces social norms about cleanliness, respect for the sacred, and maintaining this kind of symbolic order in the world. The fear of losing protection was the motivator.
It shows how deeply embedded those ideas of purity and status were in everyday life. Okay, here's one that sounds practical but still has that spooky layer. Don't sleep directly under a house beam.
The traditional belief is that sleeping right under a main beam is like inviting the house spirits, or worse.
Bother you how?
Could be anything from just disturbing your sleep, causing illness, or in the worst cases, maybe even causing death. The spirits associated with the house itself might harm you.
Why the beam, though? Is that like their highway or something?
Perhaps. The beam is a major structural part of the house, right? So maybe it was seen as a key place for these spirits to reside or travel along. Sleeping under it put you right in their zone, made you vulnerable.
Okay, but the practical reason seems pretty obvious.
Yeah, this one is probably one of the clearest safety warnings disguised as a ghost story. In old wooden houses, those main beams hold up a lot of weight. The roof, maybe an upper floor.
If that beam breaks or gives way,
You're directly underneath it. It's potentially lethal. A collapsing beam could easily crush someone sleeping below.
So the ghost story was basically a very effective way to say, don't sleep in the most dangerous spot in the house if the structure fails.
Exactly. It's critical safety advice, just amplified with a supernatural threat people really believed in. Plus, maybe less dramatically, dust and debris might collect and fall from beams, affecting air quality. But the big one is structural failure.
Definitely. Using fear of ghosts to prevent a very real physical danger, memorable too, ghost might get you, is stickier than potential structural compromise zone.
Highly effective risk management, ancient style.
All right, next. Don't cut your nails at night.
Ah, yes. The traditional beliefs around this vary a bit, but they're all supernatural. Some say ghosts might gather your nail clippings.
Why?
Who knows? Probably nothing good. Others believed cutting nails after dark disturbed your ancestors' spirits, made them restless.
Okay, ghosts or unhappy ancestors, either way, sounds like something to avoid. What's the practical side?
This is another one that seems purely about safety and the conditions of the time. No electricity, remember. Nighttime meant working by very dim light.
Oil lamps, candles.
Exactly. Now imagine trying to trim your fingernails or toenails with maybe a small knife or some basic clippers in that kind of light.
Yeah, bad lighting, sharp object. Recipe for mistakes.
Precisely. You need good light and steady hands for that. The risk of accidentally cutting yourself, nicking a finger or toe, was much, much higher in the dark.
And a small cut could get infected easily back then.
Yeah. Right. So the spooky stories about ghosts wanting your nail clippings or upsetting ancestors were likely just a strong deterrent. Wait until daylight when you can actually see what you're doing.
Simple safety rule. Dressed up to be more memorable and maybe a bit scary.
Classic case of using fear of the unseen to prevent a real, if maybe minor, physical risk.
Nearly there. How about this? Don't sleep during the early evening, like at dusk, just after sunset.
Yeah. The traditional beliefs here get pretty wild. Sleeping at that specific time, the transition time, was said to make you super vulnerable.
Vulnerable how?
To spirit possession, or that feeling of sleep paralysis where you feel awake but can't move, often with a sense of presence.
Oh yes, sleep paralysis. That's terrifying on its own.
Definitely. Another belief was that as our world goes to sleep, the spirit world is just waking up. It's their daytime.
Yep.
So if you were asleep then, your spirit might wander out and get lost in their world, unable to return.
Okay, possession, paralysis, losing your soul. Pretty good reasons to stay awake. What's the mundane reason not to nap at dusk?
Well, from a simple health angle, napping in the early evening can really mess up your main sleep later on. It disrupts your natural sleep cycle.
Your circadian rhythm gets confused.
Totally. You might have trouble falling asleep properly at your normal bedtime, maybe 9 or 10 p.m., or You wake up from that early nap feeling groggy, not rested. It just leads to poor quality sleep overall.
So just bad sleep hygiene, basically.
Yeah. And also historically, that time after dinner but before deep night was often seen as like productive time. Kids might study, people might do chores, maybe religious chanting.
So being asleep was seen as lazy or unproductive.
Could be. Especially if it meant you were then maybe restless or needed attention later when others were trying to sleep properly. So the ghost stories might have encouraged both good sleep habits and fitting in with the expected evening activities.
A mix of health advice and social pressure, reinforced with scary spirit stories.
Seems like it. Promotes physical well-being and cultural norms all through fear.
Okay, 2 left. This one's simple. Don't point at a rainbow.
Yeah. The traditional belief is super specific, often told to kids. If you point directly at a rainbow, your finger will get crooked or even fall off.
Well,
Your finger falls off.
that's a straight.
Now, the sources said this also applies to pointing at monks or Buddha images.
Yes, but that's for a totally different reason. Pointing directly at people, especially revered figures like monks or sacred things like Buddha images with your index finger, that's just considered rude, disrespectful. It's about manners and reverence.
Okay, so the finger falling off part is just for the rainbow. Why? What could be the practical reason for that?
This one feels like a safety warning, mainly for kids. Rainbows show up after rain.
Yeah, ground's wet.
Ground's wet, maybe slippery. Kids get excited seeing a rainbow. They start running around.
Pointing like crazy.
Exactly. Running, not looking, waving their finger around. It's easy to imagine one kid accidentally poking another right in the eye.
Ouch. Yeah, that could happen. So the whole your finger will fall off story might just be a very simple, very memorable way to stop kids from pointing excitedly, maybe get them to calm down, or even encourage them to go inside out of the damp air so they don't catch a cold.
Wow. So the fear of losing a finger was maybe a way to prevent accidental eye poking among children. It's quite a leap, but makes a strange kind of sense.
It highlights how similar actions like pointing could have rules based on totally different reasons. Social respect versus physical safety, just with different scary consequences attached.
Okay, last one for today. And this one sounds genuinely horrifying. Don't get saliva from a pop ghost on you, or eat or drink something unknown, because you might become a pop yourself.
Yeah, the pop or free pop is a really feared type of spirit in some traditions. The belief is terrifying. It's supposed to be highly contagious.
Contagious. A ghost.
Yeah, transmitted through things like saliva or maybe eating food or drinking water that a pop is contaminated. And if you get infected, you don't just get sick or die, you become a pop.
And what does that mean, becoming a pop?
It means you develop this uncontrollable craving for raw flesh internal organs. But you still look human on the outside. Hard to spot. It's like becoming a hidden monster.
That is truly nightmare fuel. Becoming a cannibalistic spirit creature through spit or a bad drink. What practical reality could possibly underlie that?
Well, think back again to ancient times. Before anyone knew about germs, viruses, bacteria, epidemics were terrifying and common.
Right. Things spread quickly, people got horribly sick.
And how do many contagious diseases spread? Through bodily fluids like saliva, through contaminated food and water. Exactly the transmission methods mentioned for the pop.
Cholera, typhoid, things like that.
Yeah.
Spread through contamination.
Precisely. Diseases that cause horrific symptoms spread easily and were often fatal. So this incredibly scary belief about the pop being contagious through saliva or shared food drink, it served as a powerful, unforgettable warning.
Don't share cups. Don't eat strange food. Be careful about hygiene.
Exactly. It was a very graphic, very frightening way to teach basic hygiene and caution against sharing things that could transmit disease. The terror of becoming a pop was a much stronger motivator than just saying, be careful, you might get sick.
It took the real invisible danger of germs and personified it as this monstrous, contagious entity.
Yeah.
A terrifying but effective public health message in a way.
It framed the very real danger of contagion in terms people could understand and, more importantly, deeply fear, using the supernatural to explain and warn against disease transmission.
So as we've gone through all these, it's really striking, isn't it? So many of these ancient don'ts, they sound purely superstitious, maybe just meant to scare kids. But when you dig a little, you often find these layers of practical wisdom. Safety rules, health advice, social guidelines.
Yeah, it really shows how people in the past used the tools they had, their cultural beliefs, their fears, including supernatural ones, to teach vital lessons. How to stay safe, stay healthy, show respect, behave in ways that help the community survive and function. all without modern science or formal education systems as we know them.
It definitely makes you think. How many other things, traditions, or beliefs we still have around us might have similar hidden origins, forgotten reasons buried under layers of just, that's how it's done.
It's an encouragement to look a bit deeper, maybe, to question the surface explanation and think about the context, the practical needs that might have shaped these things long ago.
Absolutely. Well, it's been fascinating exploring the why behind some of these ancient warnings. Thanks for joining us for this.